I have your book here. Thank you.
Mhm.
It is lovely. And I'm just wondering if you want to talk a little bit about any of the ingredients that you were calling out specifically in this book. I think there's a section you have in here called Foods for Our Future. So I wondered
Yeah,
if you wanted to talk about that just a little bit.
that's a great question. Thank you for asking. You know what? Our land grant universities are doing some amazing work helping farmers who are finding ways to mitigate all the damage that's being done to our land by industrial agriculture, right? And they're working to create cover crops because one of the ways to do that is to keep continuous cover on the land so that we're not ripping things up and planting them again. And by keeping continuous cover on the land, we're capturing water, we're retaining topsoil, we're feeding pollinators, we're enriching the soil because that matter goes back into the soil, and when it deteriorates, it nourishes the soil. Those plants also capture carbon and return it to the soil, which is where it belongs, not released into the atmosphere. So they're creating a lot of solutions by providing crops to farmers that they can plant that will give them a return, because after all, farmers are businessmen, and we can't expect farmers to change their industrial practices without giving them something different to grow. So some of the foods that are some of the crops that are now coming out of our land grant universities, like the University of Minnesota and the University of Wisconsin, are things like hazelnuts, because they are a perennial. They were produced every year. It takes them 5 years to get established, but once they're established, they will produce those nuts for over 40 years. Another one of those crops is kernza, which people may have heard of, which is a wonderful grain. It can be milled into flour, and it also is delicious as a whole grain. And the benefit of kernza is it's an intermediate wheatgrass. So think about it. Wheat is a grass. Grass comes back every year. Right now, wheat is planted as an annual. So think about what would happen if you tore your front lawn up every year, right? It would, all of that soil that you've worked so hard to maintain would wash into the sewer, which is what's happening with our wheat fields right now, our annual wheat fields right now. And so kernza is a perennial wheat that will return every year for at least 5 years. It also has 3 uses. It can be used to, it's planted at the end of the season. When it comes up, and it will come up for 5 years, comes up in the spring, animals on the land, cattle or hogs or chickens, whatever you have on the land, will come and graze it down. And then, like grass, it will come back up and produce a seed head, which is then harvested and milled or used as a whole grain. And then at the end of the season, the animals come in and they forage it back down, and it stays in the ground, and it retains, it stays there through the winter. So none of that topsoil washes away. So it has a lot of environmental uses to it, a lot of ecological benefits. So that's another one of the crops. Another crop that a number of the farmers are beginning to plant now is called camelina, which is a cover crop. It's an oil seed that produces an oil seed that can be pressed for oil. And it can be used for animal feed. And they're now looking into its application for biodiesel. So that's another pretty exciting crop. So those are some of the crops that we're going to see coming on in the future. The other thing we're seeing is farmers being more willing to plant what used to be called ditch crops, like elderberries. And elderberries are remarkably good for you. And there is an elderberry syrup company that will be down at Feast this year. And they're wonderful. And it's a very tannic tasting berry, but it's tremendously beneficial for humans. It's loaded with antioxidants. It's a deep, deep purple color. It's loaded with antioxidants. It's loaded with vitamin C. And in Europe now, they're doing trials on Alzheimer's, people that are not Alzheimer's patients, but people that are predicted to, it's a gene that they're beginning to suspect makes you susceptible to memory issues, and they're using it in vast amounts to see if they can mitigate some of the symptoms, of memory loss and that kind of thing. So it's a really beneficial berry, and it grows in ditches. I mean, farmers used to rip it up thinking that it was a weed, and it is very weed-like. It's not all that pretty, a bush, but it does produce this beautiful fruit that we're now also realizing has all these health benefits. But again, because it's a perennial, it does so much good for the land. So those are a couple of things. There are lots of others, but any perennial, I mean, think of our fruit trees, think of kiwi berries, which we're seeing more being planted right now. Grapes, we're seeing more grapes being planted. Any of the blue bushes that are perennials, like blueberries and black raspberries, and any of those fruits that grow really well here too. Cranberries, for instance, and those are indigenous. I mean, we have lots of indigenous foods that grow here naturally that we can begin to work with, so that they become more a part of our landscape and more a part of our farmscape. And all of this is to begin to address the issues that are being caused by monocropping, by simply growing corn and soy, which are what are so devastating to our land.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
Fantastic response. Obviously, you have such depth of knowledge here. And it made me also think about the magazine article. Your article in Feast Magazine, Volume 4, has this additional sidebar called a cook's field guide to help people think about. I mean, I think a lot of your recipes do that in your book as well. Think about how to swap in ingredients that can grow in our region, right? And that's what this is very much about. So here's your article, which people can find online from the Feast website too. And I see, Sarah is putting some helpful links in the chat for us right now to help people find that. But I would love to see if there are other people who are on the call here that have questions.
There's a couple questions. There's a couple questions in the chat. The first question was about, what did you season those nuts with?
Oh, the nuts that here's the good news. The nuts that I threw on top of the salad are Isadora nuts. They're delicious. They're already seasoned. They're like snackers, so I buy them and I'll put them in a dish, and have them for company or use them as a snack. And then they're also terrific on salads. They're really good too. If you're making a creamy soup, like a squash soup or something, chop them up and throw them as a garnish on top of the soup. They're fabulous. Or into a pilaf, if you're going to do a pilaf with one of these grains, with the okra grains or something, they're great with that too, because they're already seasoned, so you don't have to do anything else to them. Yeah, they're delicious. I highly recommend them. Be careful though. Don't buy too many bags at once. They're small. They're so good. Yeah.
Right. And American Hazelnut Company now has a snackers line as well. Yeah.
They do. And those are fabulous. And I use those just the same way. And the beautiful thing about those snackers is not only are they really delicious, on a salad or eaten out of hand or thrown into a sweetbread or something. The other thing is you can buy those nuts unseasoned. And I don't know if anybody's worked with hazelnuts, but they're a pain in the neck to cook with, because you have to toast them. And then you have to toast them until they crack. And then you have to get that kind of brown coating off them, because that's bitter. So, you throw them into a towel and you rub them together, and the brown coating flakes off. You don't have to do that with the American Hazelnut Company's nuts. They are toasted and ready to go. So you can get bags of unseasoned nuts if you want them unseasoned, and just not have to mess with them. You just use them. They're great. They're really great. And they're great for cookies, and they're really good for if you like to make nut breads, or again, to throw on top of salads or in a pilaf. So
excellent.
Beth, I do a lot of baking, and I was just curious what your thoughts are as we get into the big baking season. Obviously the easiest sweetener out there is sugar. But if it's not beet sugar that's grown in North Dakota, it's usually cane sugar, which comes from far, far, far away. Do you have recommendations for, I know you often recommend substituting honey, maple syrup, or even like sorghum. Do you have any recommendations for on things like pumpkin pie, for instance? Do you have any recommendations for substituting the sweetener in something like that to make it more local?
Yeah, I mean, I am such a fan of maple sugar. It's so good. And I find myself using less, not so much because it's sweeter than white sugar, but because it has a flavor. And so I use it in anything that calls for brown sugar. And I'll also use it for things that call for white sugar, but I'll use less of it. Sometimes if I don't want that mapley flavor, I'll maybe use half maple sugar and half white sugar, but it works really well as a one-to-one in a one-to-one ratio with white sugar. Now with honey, you want to be a little careful because honey is sweeter than white sugar, and it also is liquid. So when you substitute either honey or maple syrup for white sugar in a recipe, you're going to want to cut back on the amount of liquid, not by a whole lot, but if something calls for a cup of white sugar, for instance, you're going to use that cup of honey, or maybe just a little less than a cup of honey, and you're going to reduce the amount of liquid by about 1/8 to 1/4 of a cup. Same thing with maple syrup. Now, sorghum is fabulous. And so if you can get your hands on some sorghum, and we're going to see more of it in our markets. I like it so much better than molasses for ginger cookies and gingerbread and things that call for molasses. It's fabulous. It's milder. It doesn't have that bitter edge to it. It's not as dominant a flavor, and yet it has this rich, sorghum grows like corn, so you can almost taste that kind of corn syrup. If you have ever used a dark corn syrup, it's sort of like that, but not as it's more interesting. It's a little richer tasting. It's really good. If you can get your hands on some local sorghum, do it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Great barbecue sauce. Yeah, it's great on, you know what? Straight old sorghum is terrific on cornbread. That's a real Southern thing too. Yeah.
There's another question in the chat that asks, what is feast? They have not seen, I'm not familiar with feast. Is that something that takes place in Minnesota?
Elena, you're on.
Sure. So Feast is a local food show, but it's much more than that. It started in 2014, and the original motivation was to just bring together all of the both farms and food businesses that work with farms. So it's not just businesses that happen to be local, it's businesses who are committed to using the richness of the region that the farmers generate and provide markets for those farmers, and really to extend the season through making all of these amazing, unique, value-added products. So Feast has a festival that has been held in the late fall since 2014. And last year we switched to a virtual event with curbside pickup. And this year we said, why not both? So we have a virtual event with curbside pickup that is going on now. And we've put the link in the chat to the Feast store on the platform called Open Food Network. And you can also go to the Feast website, where there are more in-depth pages with information about the different food businesses with background descriptions of who they are. Some of them have videos to explain why they do what they do, and also links to order direct from the food businesses, because not everyone can get to Rochester, which is where we have our curbside pickup. So we're really trying to connect and bring, make the food world a little smaller, and bring people together and get to know who's making their food, and all of these background issues that are so important about sustainable production, like Beth was talking about and that she talks about in the Perennial Kitchen.
The really fun thing about Feast too is it happens before, sort of like right before the holidays really ramp up. So I still have time to hit Feast, buy a bunch of stuff for my family in New Jersey and ship it out. And it's stuff that they're not going to find in their stores. You know, it's so different than sending them something from Amazon or something. It just, you know, it's like, okay, guys, here's what I eat. Here's what I love. You know, I'm going to share it with you. And people really love it, especially the cheeses and the syrups and the jams and the jellies and things like that. It's really, they make lovely presents, both for people that live out of town as well as, you know, nice hostess gifts and things like that. So I usually, it makes my life so much easier because it's all in one place, right? And yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's very personal. It's a very personal gift, isn't it? When you give someone
Yeah.
some food item that you love. And I give a lot of food gifts to my family in Chicagoland, and I always say like, I know this person.
Yeah. That's, you know, and Elena, that's a really good point, because that's the other really fun thing about going down there is, you know, I'm kind of a wannabe food maker. You know, I've always like that, oh, maybe I'll start a jelly company or maybe, and of course I'm too lazy, I never do. So it gives me a chance to go down and meet all these people and learn about their products, learn how they got started, you know, hear their stories. It just makes it that much more fun. And it's just, you know, food's about building relationships. So it's really fun to get to know the people that are doing this work. Yeah.
Totally.
Not only do you get a taste or get to meet the producer, you get a taste of the products
That's right.
when you're attending Feast. And so this year we are able to do sampling again. You can purchase
Yay!
tickets. Hallelujah. You can
Yeah.
purchase tickets online to get into the Feast event. So the link on there has the online ticket, and you can get those tickets online. Elena, there's a question. How much are the tickets this year?
Yes. So, and there's another question earlier. Donna had asked if Feast has ever been in Chicago. And I understand that question. I understand that confusion. There's a similar event that was held by the organization Family Farmed called the Good Food Festival that has been held in Chicago in March in the past. And I don't think they have plans for this coming March to hold it again. But we're staying tuned because that is a great event also. And it's very similar to Feast. So tickets for our festival this year are $10 for adults for general admission, $2 for kids 2 to 12. Kids under 2 are free. And then another aspect of the festival is that we have enjoyed the chance to have a fest within the fest. We have an alcohol sampling area where we specifically invite farmstead wineries and also local craft breweries in the area. And so it's fun. You can get a wristband ticket for $25 and just go around and sample all of these together at once. It's like visiting 15 different farm wineries all in one spot.
Yeah.
And also, as of 2019, the event also has the opportunity for you to buy a bottle of wine from a wine vendor. And so you can buy up to 6 bottles of wine if you find one that you really like. So
That's pretty cool. That's really cool. There's another perfect hostess gift, right? And
right,
also,
definitely.
you know, I mean, but those vintners are also so good at describing not only the process of making wine and why they decided to do the different varietals, but they're also really good at helping, you know, somebody like me figure out what to serve it with, right? So it's really fun too, because you get to sample the wine and then they'll have suggestions for, you know, serve this with pork or serve this with your grain salad or something. And I find those kinds of tips really helpful.
Excellent. Who else has a question for Beth?
And
We
you don't
have,
have to just feast about the salad. Talk about anything.
yes, anything. We have a James Beard Award winner here who has written, I think, over 10 cookbooks now,
Yeah.
in some in collaboration with some neat people as well. We had a question earlier. I'm recalling someone mentioned, Donna mentioned that she learned about you, Beth, via a forward that you did for another cookbook. And she can't remember which cookbook that was, but she thinks the author might have been from Michigan.
Oh dear. I'm trying. Oh, I don't know. Maybe was it a
This
cover? I'm trying to think. A forward. Gee, I
It's
reviewed
time
a
to
lot of.
play Stump. Can you stump Beth?
I was going to say, gosh, are you sure it's me? I'm trying to think of who that might be. I'm sorry, I'm going completely blank. I've co-written a lot of books, and I also give cover quotes for the back of books.
Yes,
And
could
I
be.
review books for the San Francisco Chronicle. So, which is really fun because I get to see what other people are up to. Yeah.
Okay, I see we have a question from Sherry Mukherjee, who is someone who did a cooking demo at Feast 2019. So glad to have you with us here, Sherry. She asked, how do you decided to enter the food world? That's a
Oh my
juicy
goodness.
question.
It started when I was a little girl with my grandmother, and I cooked with her and I loved cooking with her. And then when I was in high school, I would sneak Joy of Cooking upstairs to my room when I was supposed to be doing homework, and I'd read. And then one summer during high school, and I'm old enough to really remember the advent of Silver Palette, which was a gourmet shop where they did a lot of scratch condiments, and they, had really good cheeses and things like that. Anyway, there was one that opened in my hometown in New Jersey, and I started baking bread for them. And they would sell, I would take orders for different shaped loaves and different kinds of breads. And I began selling that to them. And then when I was in college, that was when Rachel Carson and Adele Davis and Frances Moore LePay were writing their books about the connection between agriculture, pesticides, and what makes good food. And so I was kind of the de facto cook for the house that we lived in, and the same thing with graduate school. My background is really as a writer. And then I went and worked for a publishing house in New York City, and I worked on promoting cookbooks there. And then we moved to Minneapolis, or actually I took a couple of years. We lived in Princeton, New Jersey for a couple of years, and I wrote for the local paper there, and I covered food and restaurants, and I wrote feature pieces about what was going on food-wise there. And I also covered the zoning and planning board meetings. And those were super interesting because it was a period of time in New Jersey where that farmland was really being converted. A lot of those farmers had no other options but to sell to developers. And so I saw, what happens when you lose your farms. And when we moved to Minneapolis, I was totally blown away by these farmers markets. I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. And then I joined a co-op, and I joined a CSA, and I worked for an advertising company, but I did a lot of trades with friends who were farmers, and also with the CSA that I joined, Red Cardinal Farm, which was one of the first in our area. And so I did their newsletter, and I learned a lot about the relationship between how food is grown and flavor. And then I partnered with Lucia Watson, and we wrote a book called Savoring the Seasons of the Northern Heartland, which was published by Knopf, which is actually our editor was Judith Jones, who she's passed away, but she was this iconic cookbook editor. She edited Julia Child. And that's where I really, got my grounding in how to write a book, and, what the whole process was about and stuff. So that's kind of how I got into all of this. And in between those things, if anybody's ever written a book, it's not, don't quit your day job. I've been a communications director. I've taught both junior high and at the college level. So I've done a number of different things, but always, food has been my kind of thread that's kind of kept these things together. So thanks for asking. Yeah.
Definitely. That was a fascinating description. So I don't think I would get that same flavor from reading a bio. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say to people, I don't follow my path.
I think we can say goodbye from this very fun virtual cooking demo and in-depth discussion. It was a blast.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Stay in touch. My contact info is on my website. It's BethDooley'skitchen.com. If you have questions, just stay in touch.